Welcome to ResponseABLE Parenting, the podcast that shows you how to parent in alignment to your emotions, needs, and goals versus your programming, bad advice, and let's face it, outdated strategies that just don't work. You'll get in the trenches support on nervous system and emotional regulation, critical mindset shifts, stronger communication strategies, and more. In this podcast, you'll gain transformational tools that take you from reacting to every frustration to responding with clarity, regulation, and finally setting the example you desire for your kids. I'm Becky Jennings, your new parenting coach, and this is the ResponseABLE Parenting Podcast. Let's get into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. I am so excited. I have Jeff Hittner here with me. He is the founder of the Ambitious Dads Project, which we will dive into, but I am thrilled to have an open and honest conversation with a dad who is actively working on transitioning from an authoritarian style, traditional parenting of like the dad is the ruler, he's the final word, and he's moving more into this emotional regulation. He's moving more into trying to figure out how to be it all in this changing way that we parent. Learning how to be the best business owner, learning how to be the best spouse, learning how to be the best dad, and seeing how we can really do it all. And I'm excited to have this conversation because oftentimes I'm hearing the mother's perspective of all of the overwhelm. I'm hearing the mother's perspective of how challenging it is. And one of the biggest things that my clients come to me with is the communication between spouses and how that's really hard, especially when the parenting style is so different. So I'm very thrilled to get in on this conversation. So hi, welcome. Sorry, I'm talking so much already, but welcome, Jeff.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So tell me about what inspired you to start the Ambitious Dads Project.
Oh, there's the short version and the long version. The long version is I have wanted to be a dad my entire life. I mean, I remember ever since like high school. And about 11 years ago, after a long journey, I found out that I couldn't actually be a biological dad. And of course, that wasn't the end of my story. And what that meant was I had to first sort of grieve this vision of fatherhood that I always thought I would have. But after that, and now, by the way, I have two amazing boys. They're 5 and 8, and they're the absolute lights of my life. And going through this journey, I realized that if I could change my mindset about something as foundational as what fatherhood is, then we could change our mindsets around anything. And that kind of evolved in a work journey that I had also been having. And I ended up really focused on being a leadership expert and an executive coach, helping people go through these sorts of transformations in all aspects of their careers and in their personal lives. But I started recognizing something several years ago, which was that all these men, I coach a lot of CEOs, men and women, but these men in particular, they had no problem talking about their vision, their goals when it came to their career and the businesses they were running. But when it came to talking about their families, like they didn't know where to begin. And I got really curious about it because I'm a dad of intention. That's the way I like to state it, right? Like I had to be super intentional about becoming a father and having that journey. And so I really wanted to understand what was going on with other dads. So I embarked on just this quest to interview dads. And so I've interviewed about 200 what I call ambitious dads. They're kind of executive dads, but I think more discreetly, I would call them just modern dads. Dads that aren't interested in playing this traditional role where it's just like, I am the quote unquote like financial provider and you, spouse, partner, take care of everything else. And there is a lot of challenge that comes into play at all levels with your co-parent, with your kids, when you decide you want to play a much more active role in your family. And unfortunately, as modern dads, we don't have a lot of role models for this.
Yeah.
And if we don't have a lot of role models for this, then we don't actually know how to do it well. And if we don't actually know how to do it well, a lot of things happen. One, we don't have a lot of confidence in something that we care about more than anything in the world. And that tends to show up in a lot of different ways. We tend to be more reactive and we're going, wait a minute, this isn't what I want to be in front of my kids, but I don't really know how to change it. And so we start to recognize like our own inability to regulate our emotions as dads. We realize that we just need to be talking more. There are too many of us too many ambitious dads that aren't having enough conversations about what it means to be a father, what we're scared about, like what keeps us up at night in terms of our kids. And, the number one fear that dads have, or number one challenge is same thing probably that moms have, which is all around like, how do I balance all of this? Am I enough? But the difference is women have figured out how to have this conversation with each other,
Mm.
right?
Ye-
Um, yeah, it's not that women have a solution, because I know you don't. Men not only don't have a solution, they don't know how to share it. And that is not good. And so there's a bunch of things I've unearthed in this process of doing all these interviews. But that's really one of them.
That's incredible. And you touched on a few things that like immediately sparked my thoughts. It was like parenting, everyone's just like, "Oh, your instincts will help you. You'll figure it out." Like, I mean, that was literally the advice that so many of us got. "Oh, you'll figure it out. Just you'll figure it out." But there comes a point in parenting where your instincts run out and you're like, "I actually need a system. Like I need to know what to do." And I had a very I had a different journey to children. I had a miscarriage my very first pregnancy. My oldest son was a twin. He is just one. We had a full-term stillbirth in between after him, and then we got pregnant with my youngest 5 months after that stillbirth and had him like right before COVID. So we've had quite the journey through parenting, and my oldest son has severe ADHD and some other things brewing in there that we haven't quite pinpointed yet. So all that to say, there comes a point where the pattern that has been laid out for us to follow, it's just not working, right? It's not going to meet the needs or meet the demand of the family that we have. And so I quickly realized not only could I not parent with grief, not only could I not parent with a nervous system that experienced like outrageous trauma, and not only I couldn't also then parent a child with severe ADHD. Like I needed skills, I needed some roadmap to follow, which led me ultimately to this path. And what I have noticed over and over and over again with the parents that I speak to is nervous system regulation and emotional regulation. That's not ever top of mind. It's like that's never the first thing that we grab to when we're like, this moment feels out of control. It's like, how can I shut it down? How can we move on? How can we power through this? And it's most of the time what I've noticed is the women that I work with, they are like, I want to reach for that emotional side. I want to connect with them that way. I just don't know how. And also, my spouse is telling me that we just need to be harder on them. We need to crack down more. We need to have stricter rules. We need to have tougher boundaries, that we need to toughen them up. So I'm curious as to when, like, maybe it switched for you, or if it was never even a part of the conversation of like, I don't want to raise my kids from an authoritarian standpoint, or are you pivoting from a way that you were raised? I'm curious as to what drew you to the more emotional side of parenting.
Oh, yeah. Great question. And it's very simple. My kids would have these temper tantrums and they would last not a couple minutes, not 5 minutes, not 10 minutes, like 20 plus minutes. And I was just triggered. I mean, I could not last more than a minute, right? And of course, I started in that vein where I just need to be tough, or I can just like sit there, but it wasn't working. And what I started to see more and more too were like my kids were mirroring my reaction, my lack of my emotional dysregulation. And it was really upsetting me. And so, of course, I did some research, but I also started realizing a couple of things. One, I needed help. So the first bit was just, telling my wife, look, I'm going to try to hang in as long as I can, but I'm going to tag out. And when I tag out, like, because that means that at that point, like, I'm only going to make the situation worse. And that could be after a couple minutes at some point, and then maybe 3 or 4 minutes. But that still wasn't enough. What needed to happen was I needed to figure out why this was a trigger for me. And that's where the work that a lot of courageous dads that I have talked with are doing now, which is that internal work, right? That work that says, chances are, if I can't handle when my child is dysregulated, it's because I wasn't given permission to express all of my emotions when I was younger. And just kind of getting in touch with that and really starting to learn a bit more about what it means when your child is dysregulated, and that it doesn't have anything to do with like you being a bad parent. It has to do with big emotions, and it has to do, I loved all the reading and social media post by around deeply feeling kids from Dr. Becky, and that really helped me just start to like not put blame on myself. I think that's another big like spiral that men go through, is the shame spiral, where it's like, I can't control my son. What's wrong with me? Oh my God, I can't control me. Oh my God, I suck as a parent. And there's this big spiral that we go through. And those are really hard. And shame hits men very differently than women. And we project it in very different ways. But the roundabout answer to your question was, I saw my kids behaving the way I was reacting, and I didn't like it. And I knew I wanted to be better than that. And it also connects to what you said earlier. Um, like, people ask me all the time, because I've interviewed all these dads, what makes a good dad? And I say the difference between a good dad and a great dad is this. A good dad, just it's presence, right? Being present. But a great dad is a dad with intention. That's the dad that, as you said, like actually has developed a plan or a vision for how they want to father. And they're not constantly reacting. They actually are like, they know the values they want to instill. They know the developmental milestones that their child is going to be going through over the next, say, 12 to 18 months. And they've really thought about it and thought about how they want to be there. And that is a pretty big distinction. And again, being a good dad is more than enough for many. But like for me and a lot of the dads that I talk to, that's not enough. They want to be great. And that means we build what I call a fatherhood philosophy, which is really all about what I just said.
I love that. I love that. So you were talking about how in the beginning, these triggering moments were too much to handle. I'm curious as to like what your original pattern was, like the original default pattern. This is what I call that the old pattern when I'm talking with my clients. I'm curious as to what that pattern of reactivity looked like. Like how fast was it? What were you typically saying? And then what was the process of untangling that for yourself so that you could get on this new empowered pathway of slowing yourself down, understanding it wasn't a personal thing, it was their emotions and you didn't have to get swept away from them? And then did you hold on to, like, I know this is multiple questions in one, but did you hold on to like a mantra, or did you have a framework that you were then going to follow in order to achieve this excellence that you were looking to do?
These are great questions. So I think it wasn't a mantra. Let me start there, that I held on to. It was empathy. So it was understanding what was going through my child was not what was going through me, right? My child just, he didn't know how to control what he was feeling, right? So it didn't matter what I was telling him he needed to do or not do. I would say what really got me focused on it was when he would start to have a temper tantrum, and I was around caring people that I really trusted. So my wife and my in-laws, and I would try to control the situation and be like, no, you need to listen to me now, or you need to stop that now. And I would pick him up and like physically take him into the bedroom to stop him from screaming or crying, and notice like that isn't effective at all. So there was no amount of what came, quote unquote, naturally to me that was effective. And at least my personality is such that, well, I'm not going to keep doing something that isn't working, and on top of that, noticing that it's actually making things worse. So I think all of those things combined got me to start to really do some looking around. Now the challenge was, and this is another reason why I'm doing this, is there wasn't a lot out there for me as a dad. So I was going on all the mommy sites.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out like how to manage this. And thankfully, my wife really, she has her own triggers. We all do. But being patient during a meltdown is 100% not one of them. And so I knew by watching her that it was possible. And so if it was possible, I needed to be doing something different. And so all of those things sort of worked together to put me on my own journey to do better.
Yeah, and you mentioned something about how you were like it was completely ineffective. And what comes to mind is that when we continue to react in the same way, right? We have the same trigger, the same reaction, same trigger, same reaction. We end up going to that reaction even faster every single time because our brain, like we know neuroscience now, like our brain likes to go from point A to point B as fast as possible, right? It likes to do what it knows and it'll do it as fast as it can to end the discomfort. And so when we get stuck in these like same reactive patterns over the same triggers, our brain's just going to go, oh, I know what to do. And it'll just immediately react, as opposed to that intentional moment of recognition that allows us to actually slow down, that allows us to actually, get into our thinking logic brain, that allows us to be solution oriented in order for us to actually hold on to empathy, because we can't hold on to empathy when we think we're under threat, right? We're not empathetic when our nervous system is definitely turned on in fight or flight. Like that's just it's not accessible. So it is that intentionality, like you said, that has to be top of mind no matter what trigger, so that we can actually respond the way that we want to respond. Because if not, our brain's just going to default to what it knows. And
Right.
it takes a decent amount of effort. And it's not going to be like that sometimes we fall back into old patterns and we're like, oh, I can't believe I did that. I really can't believe it. But it's like the overall majority of the time when we're actively showing up in that way, we're telling our brain, I want you to be focusing on that path, not the old one. And it really makes a substantial difference. Like I think about how when you said your kid was melting down for like 20 minutes, that was like, I lived and breathed it like 16 hours a day. It was like, it wasn't just one meltdown a day. It was like one meltdown. And then 6 minutes later was another meltdown. And they were all 20 minutes. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is too much. And, I think a large part about it is there's not a large buffer between those moments, especially when they're young, that it just is so overwhelming for the nervous system that we can't reach to those things. Like the system fails along the way. Did you have practices, or do you have practices to kind of offload some of that brewing energy so that you can show up in a different way?
Um, well, in terms of how I work with dads, not so specifically, other than you'd be amazed how many dads recognize that there are different developmental stages for our kids, but like they're not actually doing the work to figure out what those are.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so, and in many cases they just lean on their spouse to give them some insights on that. So part of it is just like proudly declaring your ignorance and being like, I need to figure out like what's going on here and do some research about it. So part of it is just sharing that like research and insight with the men that I work with. And then part of it is also saying, look, you're not going to get from 0 to 25 minutes, of managing a temper tantrum in 1 week. And again, that's where like being able to tag out really comes in handy, because we have to be able to get to minute 5 and then be like, I just know my trigger is gonna explode in a second. And this is better than it was last week, because last week I could only make it to a minute. And thankfully, like my wife was patient enough with me to allow me to do that. But also for the same reason that you just said, I mean, like these sometimes when our kids, especially if they're deeply feeling kids, when they're having one temper tantrum after another, it holds us hostage, right? Like it's like, oh, he asked for something or she asked for something, and I don't really want to say no, because if I say no, it's going to trigger another temper tantrum, and then it's like then that person is kind of managing the whole family at that point, and we we don't want to get there, and then sometimes like we cave and sometimes we don't, and being kind to yourself is another learned skill that as dads many of us need a lot more practice with.
What do you think the barrier, like one of the largest barriers you've seen to fathers starting this work?
um Oh, there's a lot of barriers. I would say the first is time. When I've done this research after 200 interviews, I kind of identified these 6 gaps that dads have, and I call them like the 6 dad gaps. And the first one is just that. It's the time gap. Like we're never really fully present. We're always half somewhere else. We are always, like thinking we're not quite doing enough at work and we're not quite doing enough at home. And so that was the first one. The second one is the role model gap, which I also mentioned. Like most of us are reinventing what it's like to be a father. That's why we call it modern fatherhood. And we don't really have a blueprint for, again, how to be really well adjusted and emotionally regulated, how to have the type of patience and understanding that we want to have. The third type of gap I call the confidence gap. And that's when, again, instead of reacting, um, we want to actually feel confident that we can handle these tough moments. Now, the challenge on this one, there's a really like challenging data point here. It's, over 90%, I think it's 91 or 92% of men that are fathers identify their primary identity as fatherhood, right? Like that's the primary, this is who I am. I am a dad. And then if you ask if they're confident in being a father, only about a third of them say they have confidence in it. That means 2/3 of dads are walking around with no confidence in the thing that they identify most as. And that's really debilitating.
Yeah.
Um, and then the 3 other big gaps that I've kind of uncovered, again, very like not surprising, is I call it the brotherhood gap, right? So we're not having conversation. We're not having conversation about what you and I are having right now. Like, man, does your son or daughter do this? Like, my son won't stop having this breakdown all the time, and it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. Those conversations aren't happening. And then there's the co-parenting gap, which you mentioned at the top of the show, right? Very different parenting models, and part of it could be yes, because you know we weren't as dads, we don't, as I've said, we don't have the right role models. We also weren't taught how to regulate our emotions. But the other part is something like 70% of American couples are marrying people of a different cultural background. And it can be as simplistic as like, my wife's family is Italian and my family is more like Jewish and like it's just like a mix of Jewish and Christian and all these different
We're all
things.
mutts these days.
Yeah, just like big mutts. And so, like, the experience and expectation that my wife and her family, including her mother, had around roles was very different than what mine was. And we don't have these conversations in advance of like when our children arrive. So, like in my instance with my partner, I had to fight really hard to like do some of the childcare that I wanted to do more than anything during the earliest months, because she just wanted to own all of it. And these types of conversations, simple ones where you're asking like, what are the things that you remember from your childhood that bring you so much joy that you definitely want to have with your children? But separately or opposite of this, what are the experiences that you had that were horrible as a child? And you want to make sure you do the opposite. If you don't have these conversations, you're just going to butt heads all the time. it was really funny. My wife's family, she came from like kind of a hippy dippy sort of family, and they were never allowed. There was like no sweets in the house and no desserts. And me, on the other hand, I grew up and like we just had just the worst sort of unhealthy dessert every like there was just always cupcakes and cookies, but like the Entenmann's stuff, like the stuff that you buy from the store that's just gonna last for about 50 years,
Yeah.
even if you don't refrigerate it. And so whenever our kids like were she was feeling loving and they did something good, she wanted to give them candy. And I wanted the exact opposite. I wanted them to be eating super healthy because I didn't have that upbringing. And we just were literally butting heads on this all the time until we realized where it came from, right? Like, and that creates so much more space for empathy. So those are pieces of the co-parenting gap. And then the last gap is what I call sort of this legacy gap, which is about like showing up with intention. Like what is the vision that you want to have for fatherhood? And there weren't enough dads that had that. And so I've built these programs called the Founding Fathers Program for dads. We go through this 10 or 12 week process together as a big group to kind of address all of these topics and walk out with our own personalized fatherhood philosophy, as well as our own definition of success. Like, what does success mean to us in relation to our kids? What do we want our kids to think about when they think about success? A whole host of things.
It's 2025 and there is more parenting advice than ever before. Yet we're still confused, stuck, and as a result fall back into yelling, threatening, and punishing in moments that don't require such harsh reactions. Parenting has evolved, and it's time your parenting strategies do too. Welcome to REWIRE with ResponseABLE Parenting. This is where you get the support you're looking for so you can make fast, positive, and long-term change in your household. Inside this complete parenting system, you'll get a done-for-you roadmap that teaches you how to understand why you get so triggered, how to support both yourself and your child in the heat of the moment so you can react less and respond in a way that connects you versus creates more ruptures. You will quickly create a new nervous system baseline, allowing you to access more regulated and effective communication so that you can set and hold boundaries without meltdowns, reduce power struggle nightmares, and truly dial down the temperature that spikes every day. And if you're like me, you crave instant results and personalized feedback. Now you can join REWIRE Level Up and have 6 months of weekly coaching calls. In these calls, we work together on your specific challenges and we hyperspeed your rewiring process. This means you see faster changes in your home, which means relief sooner. This is your complete program to rewire your parenting brain so that your whole family can finally exhale. Join REWIRE today and start feeling relief as early as tonight. I mean, this is so inspiring because the traditional patriarchy design was never, you all were left out of it, right? And I think that did a lot of damage to both the women and the men in the relationship. Like, the patriarchy didn't also benefit you very much because you missed out on all of this incredible relationship that's available to you. Like, you were just taken out of the equation. And I think from that also, like, there's an emotional bond between kid and dad no matter what. And then to just kind of remove yourself from that and just be like, I'm not a part of that, you miss out on so much. And I love the intentionality that you're talking about because I feel like there's that confusion gap is so huge of like the amount of women who are like, I just give my husband the cliff notes of like what we talked about. And I'm just hoping maybe he'll implement it. And then it's like, we're still always like holding the strings. And it's a lot of an emotional burden for the primary caregiver, for the default parent, because it's like we're constantly the one in charge of the outcome. And that is a really challenging spot for us because we don't want to build resentment with our spouse. We want to have a person be able to help us tap out when we're hitting those triggers. And that doesn't happen unless we have that intentionality. That doesn't happen unless we have that person who is like, I actually want to create these memories. I want that bond. I don't want to have, I don't want you to do this on your own. And so it's I would say like revolutionary, if I could say it, to have that sort of mindset heading into parenting. And even if you're not heading into parenting. Maybe your children are 9 and 10 and you're like, this isn't working, right? Having this option for men to be able to like talk about the shameful parts of parenting, being able to have like an open, honest conversation about emotions, because, and I'm going to throw my husband under the bus, but he'll probably be fine with it. We were talking a couple years ago, and I was like, when you feel this, where do you feel it in your body? Trying to like track the trigger so I could get to the source. And he was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, did not know that there would be an emotion and then a nervous system signal kind of activating that emotion. He was just like, I don't know. I feel that emotion. I'm like, but where? Like, do you feel tense, like a tense jaw? Do you feel your fists clenching? Do you feel like your heart rate is? And he was like, I don't know how to do that. And so it was a process of being like, this is how we start to learn when we're getting triggered, when we're getting activated, so we can kind of put a stopgap before we do this whole same pattern that we always fall down. So I love, this is very inspiring, because I feel like even though it's 2025, I feel like the burden is primarily fallen on the mother. And we both decided to have kids generally together. It was like, we are going to do this together. And then the burden continues to fall on us for like, the knowledge of the sizes, what doctor's appointments, like the age and stage, like the development. And we're constantly cliff noting our spouse. So the active role that you were taking, a long way to say, the active role you're taking is critical, I think, for the health and longevity of the family unit, right? To have a spouse that is your partner in this is magical. That's like a leap and bound. I think that's like the goal of pretty much every person that I work with and listens to this podcast, is to have a partner on board. Because when the parenting styles are different, it creates such a gap. And then there's resentment. And then, one kid knows they can go to this person for the other thing. And then it doesn't work. So I love that you're doing this. How can people, oh, go ahead.
No, well, I will say that we are many. Like, I know many dads like me, and I have a podcast, the Ambitious Dads podcast, where I, exclusively talk with dads that are wrestling with these challenges just as much as moms that want to share in 50% of the load on everything just as much as moms. And we're not the only ones that need like to learn. I think there's a lot of, just as we were saying before, with like sort of these family expectations that we carry into a marriage and to raising kids. Men, at least from my experience as an executive coach, are really good at seeing, if someone's not going to let me do something, I'm going to beg off. And I am like, okay, that's your territory. And so it needs to be more than like, my husband is not like getting involved in this. It needs to be, am I creating the space to allow that to happen as well? And that, there's always a little bit more like it being one-dimensional when it comes to figuring out how to co-parent together in a way where it really feels like both parents are doing the work. And
Yeah, it's
there's
almost
just a
like
lot more.
the bid to do it might have been rejected at one point, and so we fall into this pattern, and then we're never readdressing that conversation of like,
Yeah.
hey, I know that like in the first 3 months this was kind of what went down, but then it can be this thing where we're just still constantly holding, that position. And so just having that open conversation about like, what can we do together? I love that.
And it's great that you said like in those first 3 months, for example, because a mom does have just this primary role right after the baby is born, right? And my experience, and many of the men I talked to, like, they really had to fight for the opportunity to do I mean, if I'm going to feed, then it means that we have to use a bottle, right? But that also gives me the chance to bond. Now we know that there are biological and chemical changes that happen with men, but only if they essentially have paternity leave, if they have the time to be like body to body and close with their child over the first several weeks and months. And so all of this plays a role together. And yeah, it's really hard. So then the dad also has to be patient and understand, like, geez, my partner just went through this like unbelievable life change with her body and with connection with this child. And you might get rejected, often as I did early on. And like,
Yeah.
but I didn't give up on that because I was like, there's no freaking way. It took me so long to get to this place as a dad. Like, biology be damned, like I'm going to find a way in. And but that's not always going to be the case for all men. So yeah, we need, like, there should be a little nudging on both sides for sure.
Absolutely. And I mean, that goes basically down what you've described is the nonviolent communication framework, right? Where we're talking about how we are sharing our feelings based off something we've observed, and why we feel that way is based on a value or something that we need in our relationship, right? So if we can root this all down to like, I actually really value this connection with my child, I have a need to have that bond. And then when we're talking about it from a place of needs and values, we really kind of eliminate the shame, we eliminate the judgment, because who am I to say your needs aren't valid? Who am I to say the value that you have isn't, as good as my values, right? That's not how this goes. And so if we're committed to this relationship and committed to this, working and growing, and we have to be able to have these open conversations about, if my needs aren't getting met, this is how it makes me feel. And how can we enter into this together to make it more sustainable? I'm curious how you see the future of fatherhood evolving, especially with like the tumultuous landscape that we're facing right now in the United States, and the changes and the kind of the how do you say it in a nice way? The like not so much caring about the woman in the political space. How do you see this new version of fatherhood coming in and really supporting the family unit?
I think honestly the way I view modern fatherhood is that it works for conservatives and progressives, because the idea is really that, like, that dads become more self-aware, that they build a greater support system, that they understand more about those little humans in their lives that they care about more than anything else. So I don't think it's a liberal or conservative issue or a traditional or a modern view. I think it's like a no-brainer, because we all want our children to grow up and be better than us, and that requires us like doing more than just saying, "Hey, I'm just going to figure it out as I go along." And pretty soon, just as with women, when we do try to do it that original way, like, we run into problems and we run into shame and we run into this confidence gap and we run into all the things. And by having these conversations out there like you and I are having, and the podcast that I put out, men start to see like there is another way to do this, because there were things about how I was raised that, like, I didn't really love, and that doesn't make me not proud of my upbringing or my dad. It's just like, this is a very different time, very different time.
It's a very different time. It's almost like we have to shed the ego in order to
Yeah.
into
Is parenthood not like, there's nothing that's like the summary of parenthood?
I know.
Yeah.
Like, how can you can drop that ego at the door? Yikes. Like there's
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, where can people find you? Where can they can listen to you on the podcast? You also have a Substack. So
Yep.
link that.
Well, the easiest thing is you can find me at ambitiousdads.com, where you can access my podcast and my Substack. I write regularly around about fatherhood, and I base it off of all of these conversations and interviews I have. And you can reach out. I do one-on-one coaching, and I run for executive dads, and I also run these programs for dads. So my dream is to really reach I mean, my actual dream is to reach 2 million dads and really give them the confidence to be intentional in their own way. I think one of the things that we don't talk enough about is like what it means to be a provider today, and that definition has just shifted. Like we still want to provide, but providing doesn't just mean financial anymore. It means we want to provide emotionally as well, right? And we want to provide with the types of social and emotional intelligence, and emotional understanding that like any executive in any field will tell you, like the top two, three things that are required for our kids to be successful and resilient as they grow up are self-efficacy, are like social and emotional learning and intelligence and the skills around that. So how on earth are we going to prepare them if we can't do it ourselves?
Yes. I love that. Yeah, some of the main criticisms I've ever received all are around like, oh, your kid's not going to be tough enough for the real world. And always coming back to that as being like, well, the most resilient person is always the person who can handle themselves emotionally, right? The person
Yeah.
who is actually going to be most successful in failure, in breakup, in conflict is the person who knows how to handle their emotions. And when
Yeah.
we can model that consistently for our kids, and especially when a dad can do it, it just, not only dad to girls, dad to boys, it doesn't matter. You're showing as a dad to a girls, you're showing what they should be aspiring to in terms of relationship, like the person who is going to treat you emotionally well, right? A dad to boys, showing them how they can be strong and empathetic, have emotions, not have to shut it down in order to move forward. It's across the board. It's just a better way of doing it.
Oh, I'll tell you, I have a really interesting story about that. So my son started like getting all these allergies, and so they're environmental, not food related. So they created this personalized like allergy shot that he gets every month, and it's working great. But the first 3 months, he would go and he'd get this shot with his mom, and he would come back and he would like complain that his arm hurt for like a day and a half. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna take him to the next one. And I go, and as soon as I get in there, I notice something's wrong. It's like the doctor is super old and the nurse is super old, and they're getting ready to give him a shot. And their line is like, all right, let's see you have courage. Let's see you be a big
Big
boy. And
boy.
like
Oh yeah, let's be a
and
big boy.
and I got mad. I go, no. Like, if you want to cry or do whatever you feel like doing, the moment you get this shot, you go right ahead, and I am going to be right here with you. And it was amazing. So he got the shot. He had this, like, he cried for maybe 3 seconds, gave me this big bear hug. And you know what? He didn't complain at all this time about the shot. His arm didn't hurt. He didn't complain about it for 2 days. Why? Because he had permission to like express his emotion in that moment. And I had to tell the doctor and nurse to stop being like, God, boys don't cry type stuff. And so I just saw the evidence. Like you enable them to live all their emotions, they will respond better, not worse, right? So it's people's antiquated definition of what resilience is or what being tough is, right? Being tough is, as you said, like being connected to who you are and your emotions. I will also tell you, in my program, it was a big surprise to me when I was doing work with all of these dads. There were 25 dads in my program on the topic of triggers. About three-quarters of them had never heard that word before.
Whoa.
And so it was like, okay, so it wasn't hard to pinpoint what a trigger was. Like once we walked into like, okay, well, whenever I have an oversized reaction to something that's really not that big, that's a trigger. And like we went around and people were like, oh yeah, like here's where I did, yeah, and it was amazing. And so everyone's starting point is different. And it's not to blame or to project on men who aren't aware of these things, because same thing I was saying around the role models, like most of us haven't been taught around this stuff.
The system
Um,
was not set up for you guys to succeed in this area. So
no.
it is, you're changing an entire system of how.
That's cool.
Yeah, and that's great. So that's amazing. I'm excited to share this information with my audience. I know there are so many men who are ready to do the work. They're just not sure the starting point, and oftentimes it's conversations like this that just crack that door open and expand their consciousness to go, whoa, that exists. I can actually take part in that. It's magical. So I applaud you for what you're doing. This is really, I will say again, revolutionary. It's changing the game, and I'm so excited for everybody to connect with you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, like all the moms that are watching, please just like share with your
Share it with your
partners.
husbands, right?
Yes, yes. That's always a great first step. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being here, and everybody, I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to the ResponseABLE Parenting Podcast. If you like what you heard, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. If you know someone who would benefit from this podcast, I'd be honored if you'd share this episode with them. Until next time, know that you are enough, you are capable, you've made it through all of your hardest days, and we will keep growing on this parenting journey together. This podcast was produced by Kim Kelty and myself, Becky Jennings, and edited by the Kelty Method, Branding and Podcasting.